I'd like to call the meeting of the Beaufort County Board of Education Finance Committee to order. April 7th, 2022, 5 p.m., conference room E. It's a remote hybrid conferencing meeting. In attendance, we have Dr. Tina Gross, Mr. Earl Campbell, Dr. Wisniewski, and myself. As well, we have board members Stephen Sturbinger also as well on board. Our first this will be live streamed on the county channel. And the first item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Dr. Ross.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay.
I'll second it.
All right, Mr. Campbell has moved that the agenda be approved and seconded by Dr. Ross. Any discussion? Hearing none, I call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
We have a unanimous consent. Public comments. Are there any public comments?
No, sir.
No public comments. We move to approve the February 10th, 2022 committee meeting minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes? Dr. Ross.
Yes, I move that we approve the committee meeting minutes and I'm not sure the date on the agenda says February 10th and the date actually on the minutes says the 11th. So do you know which it is?
It should be the 11th.
11.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
be the finance committee meeting minutes of February 11, 2022.
Do I have a second from Mr. Campbell. Any discussion? Hearing none. Vote on the motion. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Unanimous approval. We are now into the next item on the agenda, the 2021 E-Bond Refunding Opportunity and Term Sheet. Ms. Crosby, would you like to start?
Yes, sir. Here with us this evening is Brian Nurick of Compass Municipal Advisors, and Brian will be doing brief presentation on the refunding opportunity before you today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brian.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So I wrote a summary memorandum regarding this opportunity, and this refunding is the gift that keeps on giving. As you all recall, in the work session that I gave on we call Debt Day, I went over in great detail this refunding. We sold the bonds in September. We physically closed the bonds in December. We also invested the proceeds, and so the first paragraph of the memorandum just recaps what I explained at the meeting, that we netted 1.8 million in savings from this refunding. I worked with TD Bank on another loan prior to the Beaufort County School District refunding, and they're pretty open-minded and fairly astute in ideas and in discussing different opportunities on both sides of the transaction. And because this is taxable and they're an entity that pays taxes, there's a difference between a taxable rate and a tax exempt rate. So I went to them on the other transaction and then subsequently asked if they would do the same thing on this transaction, if they would be interested in waiving their prepayment penalty and allowing the school district to refinance at the call date, which would be in March of 2024. So we're talking about something that would occur in Q1 of 2024. And if so, would they present the school district with the term sheet today that would give a new interest rate on a tax exempt basis. So they have done so, included in the materials that I have sent, and they're willing to allow you to go through the process of a refinancing where you would additionally lower the rate from a 1.51% to a 1.23%. And so why would they do that? Well, in the refunding report, which is now on the screen that shows the cash flows of the refunding, you can see that from the school district's perspective up top, we have prior bond payments, which are essentially our new bond payments. And then we have new bond payments would be the future 2024 refunding bond payments. And so the district, after all fees, expenses, would net an additional $261,000, which would push the savings in totality to $2.1 million. From TD Bank's perspective, I think it's beneficial to understand everybody's view. From their perspective, they're looking right now at earning 1.51% taxable. So they still have to pay taxes on that interest. If they convert this essentially to a tax exempt rate of a 1.23 at a 28% corporate tax rate, they actually make a little bit more money. Not a whole lot, but a little bit more money. But I think what I was able to convey to them is what's the probability 2 years from now that corporate tax rates are still 28%. And they looked at themselves, in their committees and they said, yeah, that's right. We really need to think about if corporate tax rates go up, us locking in these economics is actually good for us and good for the school district, and everybody is a winner. So the bonds are non-callable. So they would, in the term sheet, waive the call provision. They would offer this interest rate. And since they're the only party that can waive the call provision, they will be the only party that would win, quote unquote, the sale under state law. So the action as of now would be a recommendation to the full board to accept the term sheet. The term sheet does have a carve out that if for any reason bond counsel is unable to issue an opinion that the bonds and the interest are tax exempt, then everything is null and void, nobody's out any money, and everybody just walks away. So I think that's a very important piece. But the reason that I wanted to get term sheets and have term sheets adopted is that the people at these banks change. And so what they're willing to do today may not be what they're willing to do presenting this item to them, in 2024. So I want to get everybody, with term sheet, signed term sheet, ready to go. This would just be put on the shelf after the board accepts the term sheet. And then in January of 2024, we would come to the board with a physical resolution to issue the refunding bonds. And we would go through the process and close the transaction on March 1st with the economics that you see in front of you. So again, it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving. Probably the last, we would talk about this 2014B refunding, but I'm happy to answer any questions. But I don't see any downside for the school district. I only see upside. And once again, if Franny's firm cannot issue a legal opinion, then everything's null and void.
Okay. First of all, Ms. Crosby, do you have a recommendation on this action?
I recommend that we accept the financial advisor's recommendations and to recommend it to the full board.
Okay. Any questions?
I'm willing to make the motion.
And Ms. or Dr. Wisniewski, do you have any questions?
No, sir, not at this time.
Mr. Sturberger, do you have any questions?
No, it looks like all goodness to me.
Yes. So would you make the motion?
So I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the Beaufort County Board of Education accept the TD Bank 2021E bond refunding term sheet as presented.
It's been moved and seconded on this motion. Are there any discussion? Hearing none, call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None heard. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Tanya,
Thank you.
Next?
Yes, sir. The next item is a discussion of the final referendum, 2019 referendum bond issue. And so the document before you has been created to summarize the previous bond issues. The 2020 issuance of $75 million and the 2021 issuance of $130 million. So we've issued a total of $205 million. The principal amount that was authorized in the ballot was $344,610,000. So when subtracting the 205 million from that number, the difference in the proposed final issuance amount is 139,610,000. So Brian is here and can help answer questions regarding premiums and interest. We do have accumulated thus far, and so Brian, is there anything else you would like to add to this discussion?
I think I'll just reiterate what I said at the workshop, which is, what we typically see with clients is that they accumulate some bid premium and interest, and even at times some budget savings through a process. And then as they get towards the end of the process, they make final decisions as it relates to these amounts. I did see Tanya's handout and have it in front of me, and at the bottom it sort of reiterates what was said at the meeting, which the monies can be used for a variety of sources or a variety of needs. They're all, I think, good outcomes, but flexibility is something that you can't get back, which is why I think more of our clients choose to wait to the end to make decisions on these. But again, it's the will of the board.
So are there any, first of all, let's bring up a motion.
Sure. I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the Beaufort County Board of Education approve the final issuance of 2019 referendum bonds in the amount of $139,610,000.
Second from Mr. Campbell. And discussion. First of all, Ms. Crosby, do you recommend that this be approved?
Yes, sir. I think it is wise for you have multiple options available to you, as Mr. Nurick stated, but I think it is wise to wait until the final the completion of the first round of bond construction projects are completed. Then you have options regarding the use of those funds if you should have additional needs that were not addressed in that referendum because of cost increases, or you could use it for beginning projects in the next round of referendum and potentially lower bond issuances in a second referendum. So you have some flexibility, but again, it's at the will of the board.
Thank you. I want to add something to that. Flexibility, as Brian rightly said, is something you want to keep to the last minute, so you can deal with any last minute things that come up. Secondly, I still believe that we are going to come in on time and on budget using our contingencies that are already in the projects that we have underway. This just gives us some flexibility if we have something surprising happens in the market that brings higher prices that we don't know now, that we haven't locked in yet. It also gives us the opportunity to prep for the next referendum. One of the problems that we had with this referendum for our big projects was that, of course, we did a cost analysis as we were developing the numbers for the referendum. When we did that, we did not know about COVID. We did not know about what the economy's done. And it is really surprising and quite wonderful that we have been able to put in contingencies that have been sufficient to handle these increases. We were also able to start the project. The referendum was passed in November and we broke ground in January because we spent money to do the design work. With this money, if it's available toward the end of the project, we can start the design work on the second referendum. That will give us hard numbers, because once the design work is done, you've got hard numbers for what you're going to have to do for your permitting, what you're going to have to do for your ground, whether we'll be able to either renovate Hilton Head High School or tear it down and start over. We will know, and we can cost it very good. So that means that when we go with the next referendum, we will have more hard data on the costs. And I see the market being volatile in the next 3 to 5 to even 10 years. And I think it's going to be very, very important to be able to lock down strong pricing as we go forward on projects. So this is a good thing. We are borrowing what the taxpayers voted to allow us to borrow. Anything that comes in from premiums or contingency must be used for capital. Can't be used for anything else. Must be used for capital construction. So, not like it's going to go to us. So, having said that, I see hands up. Dr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to ask in regard to those different series and their associated premiums, what is the deadline on their usage? I know we're talking about perhaps utilizing them at the end of certain construction phases, but I was just wondering what is the boundary set on that?
Franny Heiser is not on the call, but I believe that question has been asked. Brian, do you know that answer?
Franny's on.
Yeah,
Franny's here.
Oh, Franny.
Yeah, Franny is on the call, and Franny.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon, Franny.
Good afternoon. The premium is considered part of the bond proceeds. And so typically there's a 3 to 5 year period that you want to spend your bond proceeds. You can have a longer period of time. And if you choose that, which I think we would recommend, we would want to do what we call a rebate analysis. And I know that Ms. Crosby y'all have a firm on board monitoring the amount of monies that are earned on your bond proceeds. So all the IRS wants is for you to not make extra money by borrowing tax exempt monies and not spending it. So if we keep the rebate analysis up to date, you could have a longer period of time to spend those funds.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else to add, Dr. Wisniewski?
No, sir, that was all.
Thank you. David, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. I've always wanted a new floor.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. I thought that we were obligated to spend the bond money, the 2019 bond money, on the projects that were outlined in that referendum. And it sounds like that I'm wrong on that. That we can roll the excess forward. I'm a little surprised we can roll forward to 8% projects, but is that not correct?
There are really no statutory rules in South Carolina about how a school district expends premiums on bonds. 10, 15 years ago, there was a requirement that any cash premium be put into debt service and used to pay debt service on the bonds that produce the premium. that sentence was eliminated from the code. So there is now zero rules and restrictions on how a school district can spend its premium. The rules are different for a city or a county, but y'all have got flexibility. So we're comfortable allowing y'all to use proceeds of premium on capital projects. They do not have to be specifically related to the referendum projects or to the projects for which the bonds were borrowed or issued.
Okay, that covers the premium part. How about the excess borrowing? You know, if we don't use all our contingency.
If you've completed your referendum projects to everyone's satisfaction and you had bond proceeds remaining, we would probably advise that those be moved. If you have a second bond referendum, that those be moved to the projects for a second bond referendum. There has been one time in y'all's history where you did not need all the proceeds, all the bonds that were approved at a referendum. It related to a piece of property that you were not able to purchase. In that case, the money had not yet been borrowed. The bonds had not yet been issued. But in today's climate, I think it's unlikely that there would be a significant amount of leftover or excess bond proceeds. And if that is the case, then we would work with y'all to have that borrowed money expended on appropriate projects that would then allow less money to be borrowed on those additional projects. So it ultimately, your taxpayers do get the benefit of the any excess that comes from the referendum.
Yes, ma'am, and that's exactly how we want to package it. That we're returning the excess money. We came in under budget. We're returning the money to the taxpayers. I just want to make sure it was legal, that we didn't have to, spend it all on the outline, because we were very specific on what projects the money could be used for. So as long as we're not breaking any regulations, I'm really happy with that. Thank you.
I'd like to add, the other thing this gives us the opportunity to do is reduce the amount of borrowing we may need for a second referendum. Right. And one of the goals that we've given to Brian to figure out is how to have another referendum
I think the volume cut out.
Oh,
There you go.
Yeah, I've lost audio to the media room.
Can you hear it?
Hear us now?
Yes, you cut out, Mr. Geyer, on one of the things for Brian to figure out, and then it stopped.
Hey, the figuring out, Brian, is to keep the millage rate the same for a second referendum, so that there is not a millage increase to pay for a second referendum, and using these funds to help reduce the amount borrowed could help us achieve that goal, correct?
Yes, you're exactly right. I have been modeling sort of just on my own independently the second half of the referendum and trying to make sure that I don't make any sizing errors with this upcoming issuance that would then have a negative implication on a potential future referendum. And, outside of any cost increase that is just unforeseeable, I think right now we're in a really good position to have a second referendum with no millage increase. And I say that in making sure that, we're appropriately sizing each year to keep the millage rate the same. It's very important that we keep the millage rate the same, and we live within that millage rate and fund as many projects as we can and pay off the debt as quickly as we can within that 36.3 mils.
Any other discussion? Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. Therefore, we'll call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next item is the 2019 referendum bond issue.
No.
No,
We just did that.
you just did that. I'm sorry. Okay. Procurement code. Oh, another fun thing.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to drop off.
Thank
unless need
you,
me.
Brian,
Thank
as
you.
always. Excellent.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Me too. I'm jumping. Y'all have a great evening.
Yeah, thank you too, Franny.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Okay, Ms. Crosby.
Okay.
Which document did you want
Yes.
Procurement code.
Which one do you want to?
Chart, the graphic.
Yes, if you have the graphic available from, that was given to you at the board meeting.
Yeah, start there. So I'll just start by some just very broad introductions. Again, we brought this very briefly to a very long work session a week or so ago. So we didn't have an opportunity to really go into any details, and so we want to go into those a little more with you today. Kaylee Eaner's here, and she is an expert. Reggie Murphy is an even experter. So I've got a whole team of people to help today read through the complexities of the procurement code changes. So the goal is to, one, our recommendation is to adopt a model code from the state. It was written in 2020. It was distributed and released in 2021 for districts to review, have comments, and went back. So it is an extensive code, and it does require some steps to go through as this process that we provided there's a one-page executive summary that we can reiterate at the end. But what we would like to ultimately do is have this enacted and approved by the board and the state and begin to use it by July 1. Having a mid-year procurement change potentially would have the auditors looking at one code for certain transactions at certain time frames. And so the ideal time is July 1 for us. So I'm going to turn it over to Kaylee to start digging into the details. So
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me again. I'd like to go over the summary of significant changes. The reason these are deemed significant changes is that we compared our current procurement code to the 2020 model code and came up with a whole list of things from changes. But these are the significant ones. These are the ones that are going to impact the district. So if you looked at the left, upper left portion of the summary of significant changes, we have three thresholds that we use until we get into competitive sealed bidding. Currently, purchases under $2,500 do not require 3 quotes, don't require any advertising or any competitive bid. That threshold would change to $10,000 for the state model code. Anything over $2,500 up to $10,000, we get 3 quotes. That threshold would change from $10,000 to $25,000. Advertised quotes would move from the threshold of $10,000 to $50,000 to $25,000 to $100,000. And then competitive sealed bids, which is your best value bids, IFBs, RFPs, would move from $50,000 and greater to $100,000 and greater. Preferences. That is something that has interested a lot of people. We haven't had any preferences for our procurement code. This code would introduce products made in the United States as well as products made in South Carolina and a resident vendor preference for commodity contracts. For those of you that are not familiar with commodity contracts, those are goods, those are tangible items. Second set of preferences would be for service contracts. Those would be for state resident contractors and subcontractors. These preferences would have to be claimed by the vendor when they submitted their sealed bids or submitted their quotes, but all of that would be listed in the solicitation and as part of the advertisement that we put out on how they can claim it as well. Sole source and emergency, this was another large change that was happening. Currently, sole source is approved by the procurement department, then forwarded up through the chain through finance, where Ms. Crosby is the final signature signing off on sole source. The state is now requiring, if the new code is adopted, that any purchases between $50,000 and $250,000 would have to be advertised for a minimum of 5 business days prior to deeming it a sole source or allowing you to approve the sole source. And then anything greater than $250,000 would have to be advertised for a minimum of 10 business days. Emergency procurement, it still needs to be routed through procurement like it does currently, and would have to be approved by the CFO as well. But if it was a greater than $50,000 emergency procurement, and remember, emergency, we deem life, health, safety, structural, something that's going to affect the students or the staff, $50,000 or more, we have to advertise afterwards to let people know that we did an emergency procurement for that. And the last major change is exemptions. Exemptions, as we know, are not exactly part of the procurement code. They're an extension of the procurement code as part of our internal operating policies and procedures. This new code would adopt all state exemptions in addition to our current exemptions that we have that would be ultimately approved by the board or the discretion of the board. These are some major changes. I'm here to answer any questions that you have. I know that there may be a few.
So I see Dr. Wisniewski's hand up. And Dr. Wisniewski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I had a couple questions. I'll start first on the summary of significant changes. My first question is, and my apologies that I do not know this answer off the top of my head, but if the current thresholds are changed to be 10,000 as being the start for a competitive quote, does that mean that a purchase could be made on Amazon for up to $10,000?
Yes, ma'am, it does. Competitive bidding would not be required, or any comparative quotes for the purchase would not be required up to $10,000. After $10,000, that's when procurement would come into play, as it does after $2,500 now.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is in regard to the exemptions. I have a handful of them. So, Mr. Chair, if you want to move on to somebody else after I ask a couple, please let me know.
Go right ahead.
Okay. So my first one is in regard to, and it's on page, oh, I don't see a number on here, but it's where it says the policy and legal services to include but not limited to, and it talks about financial advisors, investment management, brokerage services, and says subject to board approval. It's listed as a state exemption, and it lists the, I believe the date perhaps that was added to the statute. I guess I'm a little confused because it lists 2002-02-14 for both items D and F, but I personally don't feel that that's accurately applied to F. My reading of that highlighted language is in regard to financial services, and F is in regard to board governance, consultants, and facilitators. I don't think that those are necessarily what was intended under that professional service that's listed. Can anyone speak to that?
Yes, ma'am. I can answer that for you. If you notice, there's some highlighted portions in here for the copy that you have. If the items were not highlighted with the exception of the financial advisors, those items mean that they are in the state exemption. Board governance and consultants and facilitators was not listed, but that is one we'd like to add because it does fall under policy and legal services that can be included, because when you hire consultants for the board for board governance, it typically falls under policy that you're discussing or some kind of legal services that you may be asking for. And we almost consider that we already have an exemption for professional development, but the board does not have an exemption for any kind of board governance, only professional development. So
and that means, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine, ma'am. That's it.
Oh, I was just saying that makes sense. I was confused because it has the gray next to it and indicates that the service is listed as a state exemption below, and it's talking about brokerage services. So if it's one that is being asked for by the procurement department, that's one thing. But if it's something that the state already allows for, that's different. I think I'm confused on which one it is.
So I believe that's my mistake. This is Tanya. The two items that I was trying to reference in the state code were financial advisors and brokerage services. And I inadvertently added a second section in letter F that should not have been done,
Okay.
added. So that's
Okay,
why
so the gray shouldn't be applied to F, but you do want to exempt it per the procurement department's recommendation.
yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, understood. Thank you. And then let me keep scrolling here. There was another one that I had, and it was in regard, I believe, to catering services. There's a recommendation by the procurement department to exempt catering services. Now, would that include our food services contracts? Because I know those are rather substantial.
Currently, the issue we've ran into with catering services is when we rent a facility or we're holding professional development at a facility, and the cost of the procurement code or the cost of the threshold, that 2,500, has not changed in, Reggie, how many years?
50 years.
50. It's been a long time. I've been here for 6 years.
1970, so
The 2,500, yeah, so the 2,500 has been in place for so long. Well, we know how expensive catering can be.
Yeah.
With that as well, if we can use our in-house caterer, that's something that we want to do. We want to use our facility or vendor that we're currently using. If we go out on town and someone comes in just $20 cheaper, we're using them as well. Also, when you hold training at a facility that requires that you cater with them, we still have to go out for 3 quotes. And this procurement code will no longer allow a no quote as a bona fide quote. Currently, if I go out for services and 2 vendors are not available for the day I need a service, that's considered a no quote, and I go with the quote for the vendor who is available. Now, a no quote is not a bona fide quote anymore, so we have to have 3 quotes. And we've ran into more issues with catering services and getting quotes for those, which I believe, even with board functions, getting that catering when you're trying to engage the community has been very difficult.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
We ran into that with the Tabby House, didn't we?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. And then I had just had one more, and that's on the medical devices required for instruction. That's under the heading or number 3, medical and or psychological services. Can you explain why that one would be? Because I know some of those can be a significant expense, but I also know there's quite a lot of vendors that do that. So can you give me the reasoning for that one?
So medical devices that are required only for instruction. So those would be if we need to buy audiology equipment, but that's for the nursing students at the high school that are working with Beaufort Memorial or anything else, that those memorandum of agreements that we have, trying to get quotes for that instruction. We already exempt instruction for the classroom, but because it's a medical device, it can't be. We have tables that we'd like to purchase for, I can't remember the term exactly, but it lays out a complete body on like a smart board. And you can only find those in one place, but then we have to sole source it, and we try to avoid sole sourcing as much as possible. So medical devices was something that was recommended to the procurement department, but that's totally negotiable, as we say in procurement. Everything's negotiable.
Okay, so it may be preferred that it's exempt, but you may still go out for a competitive bid. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate you answering my questions. That's all, sir.
Thank you. David, you have your hand up?
Yes, sir. I do have my hand up. I just want to ask a general question. I know historically, we did not want to adopt the state procurement code because it would screw up something that we had grandfathered in prior to. So something has changed. Am I clear, Tanya?
I think Haley could answer that better than I can.
So the procurement codes from the state has always had their own model code, and school districts have been able to adopt that model code. But the state has changed their code over the years several times, but have not always required school districts to fall in line and do the same. So we had multiple procurement codes throughout all of the districts. So when the significant change happened at the legislative level, where they made many changes, especially with the thresholds and the preferences, they developed a model code for us. Reggie may be able to speak to why we didn't adopt earlier and what would have changed, but we're required by state to remain substantially similar. We have the option not to adopt this code, but if we don't, we run into conflict with state and federal regulations. And we will no longer be substantially similar, and no changes will be able to be made to our current code. Reggie, do you want to say why we couldn't before or didn't before?
Well, I think it was a preference not to. It's not that we couldn't. The preference was because the new code actually decentralizes some of the authority in the code, so it pushes it out. And our former procurement coordinator preferred to have the control at the district office, and that was the main reason we didn't want to go to the new code.
David, did you?
Thank you. That's not the impression I got at the time, but thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Rachel, your hand's up again?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I forgot to put it down.
All right. Dr. Cross.
All right, so I have a simple question. So on the exemptions here, I see how the blue highlight, we're requesting to add these to the model code as exemptions, correct?
Yes.
What are we doing with the yellow?
The yellow are the current exemptions that we already have in our current procurement code, but are not in the state exemptions. And the best way that I can present this is the state isn't K through 12. They deal in higher ed, they deal in state agencies, they deal in local government, but they don't deal in K-12. So things like homebound services and home visits, going out to bid and taking the cheapest bid for someone who's going to be visiting our students in our homes seems to serve us better to have it as an exemption, but the state wouldn't because they don't have homebound services. So the yellow ones are the ones that we have in our current code that we are operating under now, but they're not part of the state exemptions.
So they're in addition to.
So we're gonna ask them to be exempted?
Oh, that's up to the board. The board has the power for all exemptions. The state does not. The state will not deal with the exemption portion of the procurement code. We have to adopt their exemptions, but anything in addition to that is all board governance.
So they're currently on our list of exemptions.
We currently have the items listed in yellow as an exemption as our current procurement code.
And we're recommending to keep those as an exemption.
Yes.
Okay, that was okay. And then the blue is, those currently aren't exemptions?
They are not exemptions.
But we think they should be.
Yes, and they're used by other school districts. It was a lot. It's like a three-piece together. A bunch of the procurement coordinators got together and submitted all of their exemptions and what was beneficial to their school district. And we pulled them together and pulled out the ones that we thought would be beneficial to us to be added to the procurement code. So exemptions don't change very often. They've only been changed twice, I think, since I've worked here in 6 years. And the procurement code thresholds haven't been changed in 50.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So have any school districts in South Carolina already adopted the model? Procurement. Five. Yeah. And so if we're looking to adopt the model procurement code, as you mentioned, a good start date would be July 1. So does it have to be, obviously, it has to be submitted to the state with these, I don't say modifications, or whatever word you want to use. So, and then before obviously July 1, and how long, do you know the time frame for that?
What will be submitted is if the finance committee recommends it to the full board for approval,
Yeah.
and the board approves the procurement code as is, or they make any changes. Remember, exemptions are separate from the procurement code.
Yeah.
So that'll be a separate item. We submit it to the SFAA. Once they do that, could take them a week, maybe, to go through it. They gave us a document where we track all of our changes, which makes it a lot easier for them to approve or deny. Once they send back their approval, it'll come back to the board for a second reading for a final adoption, adopt for implementation, and then a second item of motion would be for the exemptions as a review, and then approval to be added to our internal policies and procedures.
Okay. And the big reason of wanting to go away from what we currently have to this model is so it would be in compliance, would be the right word, with state and federal procurement code.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I have just a couple of questions. First of all, it looks like to me that it gives us more flexibility than what we currently have.
It does, with the changing prices and
Yes.
inflation and
Yes.
manufacturing increases, it's.
Yeah,
it
so
gives-
it's not a compression. It's more of an expansion of the amounts that you can use for certain things. Okay.
Yes, sir.
The other question I have has to do with service contracts and state resident contractors and subcontractors. You say they will get an advantage. Do you know what type of advantage?
I do.
Good.
I'm flipping over. Came prepared. There is, for commodity contracts, there's US EPP, which is the end products that are made in the US.
Mhm.
And then end products that are made in South Carolina, and then resident vendor preference. So if they have end products that are made in the US, it's 2%. End products that are made in South Carolina is 7%, and then a resident vendor preference is 7% as well.
Super.
Yes.
Good. And that's, if we adopt this, becomes effective on the 1st of July.
Yes.
That is something that we need to let out to our contractors and our local community right away. Not closer to the 1st of July probably, but that's a significant advantage. And, that would help us, don't you think, Earl? Get more, get some advantage to our folks who come in. That's good. That's good. Any other questions? I'm hearing none. I think we have a motion.
Yes, we do. I move that the Finance Committee recommends that the Beaufort County Board of Education adopt the 2021 Model School District Procurement Code. The Finance Committee further recommends that the Board of Education approve the addition of the procurement exemptions to the model code as presented to the committee. Upon adoption by the Board of Education, the 2021 model code with the exemptions will be forwarded to the State Fiscal Accountability Authority, Division of Procurement Services for final approval.
Second from Mr. Campbell. Is there any other discussion?
Copy of this. Go to each board member.
Yeah, well, when we bring it to the board.
Yeah.
That's what we're gonna have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
the whole thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Rachel, did I get an aye?
Yes, sir, you did.
Right, thank you. Okay. Now we're on the annual resolution for grant authorization.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. So each year, we bring before you an authorization or resolution to authorize the superintendent to sign or a designee to assign grants, submit and administer grants, and as well as federal, state, or local grants, and as well as foundation grant applications and cooperative agreements. So this looks a little different. It's more in compliance with the State Department requirements. And we also referenced an administrative regulation that cites that we have to do this. So this is just an annual resolution that we request approval on to allow us to manage our large volume of grants we receive every year. So.
Do we have a motion?
Yes, we can. I move that the Finance Committee recommend that the Beaufort County Board of Education authorize the superintendent or his designee to apply for, sign, submit, and administer federal, state, local, and foundation grant applications and cooperative agreements for the 2022-2023 school year.
Second.
Here a second. Any discussion? I don't see any hands. Hearing no request for discussion. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. So the next item on the agenda is future topics.
I have one, and I don't know what I should wait till the work session to talk about this. I visited several schools last couple of months, and a lot of many of the principals were talking about hall monitors, and I would maybe see what they would cost, because they think that a lot of teachers are weighted down with the bus duty and all this stuff. So
That's something that probably ought to be a joint thing with the academic committee and to get their, what they think the requirement is.
Yeah.
The academic committee should probably talk to the principals and to the ISD and to, it could be operations as well. And then once they figure out the requirement,
yeah,
then it should come to us to figure out costs and where it would fit into the budget.
that's fine.
So it might be a budget discussion as well. We do
Yeah.
a work session on the 22nd.
Work session.
We can run some numbers and have them available for that discussion as well. So that's an option
Yeah.
since it will be the full board.
Right.
And then we're only talking about the middle school.
Middle schools?
Yeah, middle school.
High school,
High school principal wasn't, the ones I talked about was concerned about it.
Okay.
I understand.
Right.
Any other future topics? Good.
I have one more. I mentioned last time that I was going to do the Minority Women Business Enterprise Report. We do that twice a year, so that I didn't bring it forward today because we had so many other things on the agenda, but so I'll include that for next time.
Good. I saw a email from Dr. Voss to the superintendent asking for where starting salaries are throughout the state for teachers. And I think that would be an interesting discussion to bring to this committee to talk about that. I think we'll talk about it during budget.
Exactly.
But there needs to be a strategic view of how we're going to get to where we want to be in teacher salary. And I think it's pretty obvious that 388 is not going to allow us to get to our ultimate goal is in 1 year, maybe 2, maybe even 3 years. But we should be putting a mark on the wall as to where we want to go, and then figure out the details of how the heck we'll get there. So that might be a topic that we could talk about in the future meeting.
We'll be talking some about that at the work session also,
Yes.
but we can certainly
Yeah, I
follow
think,
up with another.
the work session is going to talk about this coming budget,
Right,
and I'm looking at out years.
yes.
is where we're gonna need to be.
You're saying strategic goals for starting salaries?
Yes. Is there any other? I don't see any hands. I think we can then, yes,
Our next
Oh,
meeting,
yeah.
next meeting.
our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, May 12th.
It's good to me.
So our timeline between the work session on the 22nd and the currently proposed board certifying the budget on May 3rd is a very tight turnaround. So I guess we'll play it by ear on the 22nd to see what the will of the board is on. We typically have had a special call meeting in between to help go through some of the details or options of the budget. So,
Would you want to, so with the work session on the 22nd, our next planned finance committee meeting would be on the 12th. Would you be willing to move your finance committee to the 5th if there is a special called board meeting so that you could have it the next week, the week of the 9th, if it's anticipated?
or should we just
Or
see
just
how things go?
I think we should see how things go and the full board would probably, if they have something that they want us to look at before the next meeting, they can tell us and we can adjust accordingly. What do you think?
Yeah. We might just hold a few dates in case of the need for extra, another meeting, but we'll just see how things go and.
Let's leave the 12th on there for right now, and then that may move.
12th at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can say right now, I'm not available on the 5th of May.
Okay.
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 Is that right, Keith?
The 12th is fine.
Rachel, is that okay with you?
I won't be in town on the 12th, but I trust you good folks to do the work.
Okay. All right. All right. I hear a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.